Sessoms. I'm the president of the University District of Columbia, and I'm delighted to see so many of you here on a slightly rainy afternoon to sort of talk with experts, real experts, on this incredibly important topic. Financing cities is a big deal, and I'm formerly a policy wonk, and now I realize the only thing that matters is money. You can have all the good feelings you want and all the policy you want. If you don't have any money, you can't do anything. So it's a big deal to understand how that's done and to, in the end, learn to do it better. UDC is the only urban land grant university in America. We have an obligation to really understand and help cure the ills of the urban environment. If we can do it in Washington, D.C., it's a sort of an opportunity to model for the world. And since we are the capital of the world until Beijing takes over sometime, we're going to take advantage of the opportunity that we've been afforded. I want to acknowledge just the folks who have been sponsoring this event, Dean Charlie Mahone in the School of Business and Public Affairs. Charlie's here. The Office of International Programs, I don't see Dennis here, Ambassador Antoine. Oh, there's Paul Tennessee. Wave your hand, Paul. He always looks distinguished, which is really kind of disturbing. And the World Bank and their Office of Local Government and Local Programs of the Urban Division. And I won't pronounce it. Well, Abajasi Gandhi, I think is how you pronounce his name. He's here. Oh, she's here. Really? I haven't met you before.
Well, now
there you go. I've done it already. We were delighted, I should say, particularly with our collaboration with international organizations, and the World Bank has been a real stalwart in working with various faculty members here and pushing the envelope forward. We have 3 invited guests who are just wonderful. Nat Gandhi, who's the CFO of the District of Columbia. He has a very peculiar position. He's got to manage the money without any total control over it, which is really interesting. But he, I think, is probably, I mean, he can be modest about this. He's probably the most powerful CFO in the nation, in the municipality. And he can explain to you why that's the case. Professor Enid Slack of the University of Toronto. Glad to have you here. It's a delight to see you. And Rupak Chattopadhyay, who's from the Forum on Education, Forum of Foundations, or Federations, or whatever you're from. Yeah, it's something. There you go. We are looking forward to a tremendously interesting discussion on a very complicated subject in a time when recessions are dominating the talk, but recovery is in the air. So it's really good. And with that, I'll turn it over to whoever I'm supposed to, Bob Ebel there, who is an expert on municipal finance, among other things, and is here to, as a visiting professor who will be more than visiting soon. Bob.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, President Sessoms. Thank you very much. I would also like to acknowledge Dean Charlie Mahone of the School of Business and Public Administration, who has been the engine behind this whole event, and thank you so much for making this work. We have 2 hours. We're going to have 2 good hours, a little less than 2 hours now. And the way we're going to be organized, we're going to have Professor Slack and Mr. Chattopadhyay go with the presentation on the overview of the issues here, what's going on in the other capital cities. And then we're going to follow with Nat Gandhi, the District of Columbia, the CFO. And then Abajasi Gandhi from the World Bank is going to speak on the World Bank's urban strategy and put this whole thing in context. Let me introduce each of the people very quickly, and then we won't need to introduce them at separate times. Rupak Chattopadhyay is the Vice President of the Forum of Federations based in Ottawa. He's going to say something about the Forum of Federations. I'm going to say something that I think is accurate and dramatic. It is probably the premier, if not the premier, among right at the top of the heap of knowledge think tanks in the world, and it's right up there with the World Bank and local government initiative and those organizations. So if you, say students here, want to know about federalism and about local government, the Forum of Federations website is the place to go. Rupak has quite a illustrious history. He was a advisor at the Sri Lankan peace talks from 2002 to 2004. He has been a co-director of the organizing committee for now the 5th International Conference on Federalism. It'll be next December in Addis. A remarkable conference where they bring together the experts and the leading political players in the world, I would say, on federalism. He's been with the Consultative Group for the Study of Intergovernmental Relations at Interstate Council for India. He is quite published. He's got 2 recent books out. In addition to this one, he's just published a book on intergovernmental relations in federal countries. And Rupak, thank you very much. Enid Slack. Enid Slack is professor of finance at the University of Toronto. She's director of the Institute of Municipal Finance and Governance at the Monk School. She teaches MPA. And for those of you who are in public finance classes, or I hope you will be in public finance classes, if you don't see Enid Slack on the syllabus, something's wrong with the syllabus. Enid is widely published. She's an expert, recognized global expert on metropolitan governance, been very active in the Toronto metro area. She's written, I think, a seminal piece on land taxation in the world. She is also an author of recent work on North American local governments, and she is an expert on intergovernmental grants. And you will know of Enid Slack when you get into public finance and intergovernmental relations. Nat Gandhi. Nat Gandhi probably needs no introduction to this group, but I always learn when someone says they need no introduction, you probably should introduce them. President Sessions mentioned something about Nat's record. We are now in the 13th consecutive year, Nat, of a balanced budget. There's a wonderful chapter in that book about how Washington, D.C. operates, and it is unique. It is unique among the world cities in this terms of the way this OCFO operation works. And you must read it, and you must understand that the lessons we have here, I think, are good for the rest of the world, the rest of the country. Nat is a PhD from LSU, professor at the University of Pittsburgh, and was head of a division at GAO. And one of his most difficult tasks in the last several years was that he was my boss for 3 years when I was at the CFO's office. But a very good boss, by the way. Abda Joshigani, Abda, it's nice to have you here, is the head of the urban program for the World Bank Urban Development Division. Abda is the person who has recently put together the new urban strategy for the World Bank. It is the unit that is the knowledge base for urban governance at the World Bank. We are an urban land grant institution. We have a lot in common to work together. And with Abda's help, we have a World Bank co-sponsorship. They've been very helpful here. I see some of my World Bank colleagues here. Welcome. And so Abda will then be talking about the urban strategy. With that, Rupak, Enid, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Let me start by thanking President Sessions for his very kind introduction and for opening the doors of the university. To Dean Mahone for making this possible. And of course to Bob Ebel for his great energy in putting this event together. It wasn't a very long time ago that we contacted him and said it might be interesting to do something in Washington on the subject that we have at hand. And Bob, with great energy, put it all together. And 2 events in one day. Was truly, truly remarkable. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for coming to this. This was a project that Enid and I had great fun doing. So I hope you'll enjoy listening to our findings, but also hopefully go away having learned something that you didn't know about this subject. We certainly didn't know much about this when we first started working on it. So the way we've organized the presentation this afternoon is that I'll provide an overview of the context in which we did our work, as well as some preliminary overview of our findings. And Enid will then talk about governing structures and the financial aspects of capital cities. In order to understand the context of our work, it's important that I tell you a few things about the organization that I work for. The Forum of Federations was founded in 1999 by the Government of Canada as a learning network on federalism. This was founded at a major trilateral conference convened in Mont Tremblant in Canada with President Clinton, Ernesto Zedillo, then President of Mexico, and our then Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Over the last 5 or 6 years, the forum's gone through a process of internationalization where, in addition to the Government of Canada now, we have 8 other partner governments. Now I've got the flags on there. So that's Australia, Brazil, Canada, Ethiopia, Germany, India, Mexico, Nigeria, and Switzerland. So as you can see, we've got quite a range of different kinds of federal countries from all over the world who see value in the services we provide in terms of intergovernmental learning and education, but aimed particularly at practitioners, in that we look very closely at issues of public policy as they relate to the management of federal systems. And the US, of course, is one of the world's oldest federal systems. I said earlier that the forum was founded at a major international conference in 1999, and we've since had these conferences every 3 years. Our first conference was in Canada, our second conference is in Gand, Switzerland, our third conference in Brussels, Belgium, the fourth in 2007 in New Delhi. And it's really out of that conference that this book comes. As I said, the forum is a learning network for practitioners. We have very senior people who come to these conferences, heads of state, heads of government, governors, chief ministers, and the like. And one of the subjects that we looked at this conference in 2007 was that of metropolitan governance. And given this was in Delhi, we thought it appropriate to look at the issue of capitals, not knowing what territory we were going to go into. And the keynote at this particular session happened to be the Chief Minister of Delhi. If you like, Chief Minister is the equivalent of a state governor. And Delhi is a unique creature, if one can call it that, part federal district, part state. And certainly, it would be no exaggeration to say, with one of the most complex and perhaps very poorly designed governance systems. So the Chief Minister at this session threw her hands up into the air at one point and said, well, gee, wouldn't it be nice to know how other countries manage their capitals? And that was the genesis of this project. And questions that she put to us, well, how are other federal capitals organized? What's the nature of their relationship with upper tier governments, provincial, federal governments? And last but not the least, the most important question for her, as I imagine it is for Washington, is how are they financed? Now, having done that, we set about creating a project where we could draw on experiences from as many federal capitals as possible. There were in fact 26 federal countries. We certainly didn't have the wherewithal, the stamina to look at all 26, but these are the countries that we looked at. So the cities and the countries that we looked at: Canberra in Australia, Brussels in Belgium, Ottawa, Canada, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, Berlin in Germany, Delhi, of course, Mexico, Abuja in Nigeria, South Africa, Switzerland, and the United States. In choosing these countries, we tried to cover the entire gamut of different types of capitals, from very small capitals like Bern, under 500,000 people, to very large ones like Mexico City and New Delhi, with populations of between 14 and 20 million people. We also wanted to ensure that we had all the major regions covered, and we also wanted to ensure that we had included in our sample as many, or at least one, of every type of governing structure that was out there. And last but not the least, an important consideration was finding people who could write about capital cities. It wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that this is probably the first comprehensive work looking at capital cities in 40 years. And we're very glad that it is, because it made our job a lot easier. And we really wanted to actually include several other countries like Brazil, in our study, but we simply couldn't find people in time to actually write on these in a comprehensive fashion. Now, having embarked on this project, the first question we asked ourselves is: are capital cities really that different from other cities. But in other words, was it worth our while looking specifically at capital cities? And the conclusion we came to was, yes, indeed, they were different from other cities. And some of the reasons, as I've put up there, include the fact that all capital cities have in common the fact that they host national institutions, government, universities alike. They, of course, play a unique role in the life of a nation. They're symbolic of what a nation stands for, and therefore are clearly very different from other cities in most countries. The third point, they promote pride through ceremonies, but also lightning rods for irate citizens, and I'm sure DC has had many protests over the years. And last but not the least, they also, in some sense, in the public imagination, capture how national policy is conducted, for good or ill, however that may be. And things like Washington raised taxes, Canberra introduces transfers, Ottawa wants to take our guns, take your pick. But that's sort of how these things work. Now, having established that capital cities are indeed different from other cities, the second thing we sought to establish was that capital cities in federal countries are in fact different from capital cities in unitary states. And the reason for this we felt was very important. And in doing so, we actually, I think we, in the book, fairly reasonably established the fact that federal countries, there are unique attributes that can be ascribed to capitals in federal countries. Most federal countries are either large or diverse or both. Whether you're the United States or Canada on a continental scale, and even if you speak the same language, there are lots of variations across the country. Or you're Switzerland with only 6-7 million people. 7 million maybe on a good day, but with 4 major language groups. Or you're India with, 22 national languages and 1 billion people. So they are, creating a national capital is about capturing that diversity in the country. Second, the second issue, of course, is that given the diverse situations in many federations, capital cities in federations actually have to provide a neutral venue for the conduct of public policy and public discourse. And also, as a result of diversity and size, capitals have to be located in a manner that is seen to symbolize the nation as a whole, however that may be. And I'll give you one or two examples. In Canada, for example, our capital, Ottawa, is located on the historic fault line between the English-speaking and the French-speaking part of the country. And I understand that when the site here for the District of Columbia is chosen, again, this was a cultural fault line between North and South. Similarly, in Nigeria, when they made a conscious decision to move capitals from Lagos in the south to Abuja in the center of the country, that too was a conscious decision to find a neutral, acceptable place from which the country could be governed. The final thing that we considered in the federal context is that federal capitals are both symbols of the nation, but they're also places where people live and work. And given that you have multiple tiers of government in federal systems, capital cities in federal systems have to constantly deal with upper tier governments, whether it is a state or provincial government, whether it is neighboring jurisdictions, or it is upper tier governments in the form of the federal government. So this is what our project was essentially about. As we progressed with our project, we also discovered some very interesting facts about how various cities came to be and how capitals were chosen. And really how diversity has actually played a role in the choice and the location of cities around the world. I've got an illustrative list there, and I'll just talk through those in a minute. Excuse me. South Africa was a particularly interesting case. The historic capital of South Africa was Pretoria. Now, Pretoria, of course, was also synonymous with years of exclusionist apartheid rule. But Pretoria also lies in the heartland of black South Africa, if you will. In the new South Africa that was meant to be accommodating to all races, there had to be some resolution of how the capital could play a national integrative role. So what they did was to split up national institutions, with government and bureaucracy functioning out of Pretoria, now called Tshwane, and Parliament sitting in Cape Town, which is primarily an Anglo-white city. And this was the way they bridged it. Abuja, I've talked about a little bit, on the cusp of the historic North and the historic South. Berlin, a very interesting city. There was a big debate about whether it made sense to uproot government from Bonn and move everything to Berlin. And having had that discussion, the Germans came to the conclusion that East Germany and West Germany were so different, and it evolved so differently over the years of partition, I suppose you could call it, that it was important to make a gesture to the Easterners and also have the practical aspect of making an investment in Eastern Germany. And Berlin played this role very well. It was a historic city. It was the historic capital of Germany. So in some sense, it marked the return of Germany to its former glory. But in moving the capital, the federal government put in a lot of money into developing that part of the country. And this was a very, very interesting case. Canberra, also very interesting. Somewhat like the United States, the Australian Federation was created bottom up, the various states coming together and deciding that they needed federal government. But in doing so, none of the states or none of the major commercial centers wanted to give up commercial importance. So when they chose a capital, they decided it was going to be as much of a backwater as possible, and hence the choice of Canberra. Melbourne and Sydney are Australia's major cities, their largest ports. And an explicit condition in setting up Canberra were two explicit conditions. First, that it had to be at least 100 miles away from Sydney. And second, that it could not be on the coast, for fear that in the future the federal government might eclipse the influence of the state governments. Well, Washington, you know, and I don't need to go into that. Ottawa, as I mentioned, again, when Canada was created in 1867, the two major commercial centers, Montreal and Toronto, vied to be capital of this new country. In the end, Queen Victoria chose a rather obscure lumber town, which lay on the border between Ontario and Quebec, French, then sort of English and French Canada, but was also, and in those days, an important consideration, far enough from the US border that it was easily defensible against American aggression. That no longer applies. The other one I don't have in here, but I think, but I can talk about as we proceed. One of the things we looked at in studying these capitals is they're clearly, as all of us who live in capitals know, there's a certain cost associated with being with capitals. You host heads of state meetings, you host inaugurations, there are issues of tight public security, restrictions of movement when VIPs are around. So is there, given all of these drawbacks, do cities really want to be capitals? And there is a certain allure to being a capital, because being a capital means bringing high quality and stable jobs to a particular metropolitan region. I remember about a year and a half, Time magazine did a survey of booming cities across the world. They looked at 10 cities, and 9 of these were capital cities. Even in Canada, where we haven't quite had the same, we haven't had a meltdown in terms of house prices, but in the rest of the country, it seems that home prices now flattened out. But in Ottawa, they continue to climb, the result of very well-paid and stable jobs in that part of the world. Tourism, prestige, having access to cultural infrastructure, whether it's operas, museums, these were all important elements in a city deciding that it actually wanted to be capital. I talked briefly about the benefits and the costs of being a capital, the costs I mentioned. But the other thing we discovered as we did our project was there was often a very keen competition among cities to be capital because of the various benefits that accrue as a result of being a capital. And the story